Chaim, everyone. We're starting to settle back down after the Yom Tov high. Now we have to bring it into the rest of the year. So, if I were to ask you, who do you think, which person in history has helped the most people in the world, has saved the most lives in the world, right? Now, there are quite a few people who could, we might have to discuss, but one of them we'll discuss tonight. In 1918, Fritz Haber, a Jewish German scientist, was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. And, however, it was a very controversial award, and many of his peers refused to attend the ceremony. And two of the other prize winners refused to accept their prize together with Fritz Haber. What was so controversial about this award, about this prize? So in 1898, the world was facing a terrible, terrible problem. Now, it was not global warming. That hadn't been discovered yet. People weren't aware of that problem. There was a different problem. It wasn't global warming. The big problem in those days was known as the wheat problem. The wheat problem. There was a big shortage in food, right? The British chemist William Crookes wrote in 1898 that with the world's growing population, we stand in deadly peril of not having enough food to eat. In less than 30 years' time, people all over the world will be dying of starvation, he predicted. Right?
That's wrong.
Now, he continued, one second, that's not where he stopped. He didn't stop there. He said this is a problem which we could solve, and it's up to science, it's up to chemistry to solve this problem and to increase the yield, the agricultural yield, so we can supply the world with enough food, the growing world population. Now, what exactly was the problem? So, the problem is that that if you look at a person's body, right? So, a person's body is made up of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and the fourth most common element in the human body and in all of life, really, is nitrogen. It exists in many proteins which are essential for life. And people get their nitrogen from the food that we eat, from the plants that we eat. We get nitrogen from those plants, and those plants get it from the nutrients in the soil, right? Now, nitrogen is actually one of the most common elements in our atmosphere. Right? About 80%, almost 80% of our atmosphere is made up of nitrogen. However, plants have no way of extracting the nitrogen from the air. It's too difficult of a process. Instead, they have to get it from the soil, and that's a very slow process, and it's very, very limited. And that's why if you were to plant something in the same piece of earth, in the same farm for many years, you would slowly deplete the nitrogen. It would take time for it to regenerate it by the bacteria in the soil. And that's really the limiting factor of growing produce, right? Of growing things from the ground, because it's limited by the nitrogen that exists in the ground that can be extracted. Now, what's one solution to this? One solution, which was always known, is to use natural fertilizers, to use different wastes of different animals which you put into the ground. And it can provide the necessary nitrogen that's needed to grow crops. And this was something known way back, and fertilizer was always considered a valuable thing. Rashi tells us that all the way back in the time of Yitzchak had so many animals that people used to say that the fertilizer which is produced by his animals is more valuable than the gold and silver of Avimelech, king of the Philistines. Right? It was always a very valuable commodity, fertilizer. And later people discovered that actually fertilizer made from waste of birds is even more valuable. And there were wars that were actually fought over bird waste, right? In 1865, Spain went to war over the Chinca Islands. The Chinca Islands wars in South America, these were not inhabited islands, but these were islands that had a lot of birds living on them, and that's what they wanted. They wanted the fertilizer. However, what? Peru, a few other South American countries were waging war against them. And this was recognized, however, they obviously recognized that this was something which was going to run out very soon, especially since the world population was growing and there was not enough natural fertilizer to support the growth of the world population. And therefore, the only solution was to come up with a synthetic process, to come up with a way to create synthetic fertilizer. And this is the problem that Fritz Haber set out to solve. Right?
I have a question.
Is it a question that can wait for after the class? Okay. Let's try to wait till after the class, unless there's something stopping you from understanding what we're discussing. Okay? So, in 19... what year was it? Yes, so in 1904, he set out to solve this problem, to come up with, there were many people actually working on this problem, to come up with different ways to extract nitrogen from the air. And he spent 5 years on this problem. He came up with the very complex machines which worked under high pressures and high temperatures. And finally, after 5 years of work, in 1909, he finally did it. He went running out of his laboratory yelling, right? Come on down, I got ammonia. I was able to create ammonia, right? Now, he had performed a miracle, right? People all over the world heard about this news. They began talking about Brot von der Luft, right? Bread created out of thin air, right? And people immediately, within a few years, they had set up factories to produce synthetic fertilizers. And farmers found that they were able to produce 4 times as many crops in the same piece of land. And this is really what enabled the growth of the world population. However, as beneficial as this discovery was, there were also downsides, right? It wasn't long before people discovered that while ammonia and synthetic fertilizers had power to create bread, they also had power to create destruction, right? In many years later, on April 16th, 1947, in Texas, in a pier in Texas City, as they were loading up a ship with synthetic fertilizer, somehow it caught on fire and there was a tremendous explosion. The ship was completely torn apart and nearly 600 people lost their lives and thousands more were injured in what's considered the biggest industrial disaster in U.S. history. And of course, this was known many years earlier. And in 1914, when the Great War, the First World War broke out, Germany immediately recruited Fritz Haber to help out in the war effort, right? To create explosives. And he... No, the explosion was in 1946, but I'm saying it was known that the idea, the ammonia was discovered in 1909. The explosion that I discussed was in 1946, but there were explosions all the time. That was just the most famous one. But there were explosions all the time, smaller explosions. There was one a few years ago in Beirut, I think.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, it's something which was known all the time, and of course, Germany immediately recognized the destructive power of ammonia, and they brought, they recruited the Fritz Haber to help out in the war effort. And like many other scientists in many other countries, he joined, right? And he came up with justifications, right? Just like the scientists later in the Manhattan Project who worked on the atom bomb. They came up with justifications, right? He's quoted as saying, in times of peace, a scientist belongs to the entire world. He's supposed to benefit the world. But during times of war, he's a patriot and he has to help his country, right? And when people told him that you're destroying so many lives, he said, if I can make the war end a little quicker, I'm going to be saving lives, right? He came up with all different sorts of justification, and he went about converting his fertilizer plants, factories, into explosive factories. And now instead of creating bread out of thin air, they were creating bombs out of thin air. And yet this alone was not the end of it. On April 22nd, 1915, at around 6 p.m., on the Western Front, near the French trenches, the German army under Fritz Haber's direction released 168 tons of chlorine gas. Right? The green mist, the green wall of green mist moved towards the trenches and sunk down into the trenches. The soldiers in the distance claimed to have seen birds dying in its path. And any soldier who was in the trenches at the time immediately lost the ability to breathe. They describe it as drowning on dry land. Right? 5,000 soldiers died on that day. And that was not the end of it. This went on. He oversaw many such operations. Altogether, it's estimated close to 100,000 people lost their lives because of chlorine gas during World War I. And therefore, it's pretty obvious that in 1918, as we mentioned, when he won his Nobel Prize, there was a lot of opposition. It was a very controversial award. On one hand, you have a scientist who perhaps saved the world, right? He created the ability for farmers to produce 4 times as much produce in their same land, the same piece of land. But on the other hand, look what he did. And that still wasn't the end of the story, right? Years went by, and in 1933, Fritz Haber when Jews began being persecuted, when the Nazi Party rose up in Germany, and they began persecuting Jews and Jewish scientists. He resigned his position in solidarity with his fellow Jewish scientists, and he left Germany. He died a year later in Switzerland. And about 10 years later, in 1944, the Nazis went back to his labs, and they took another one of his inventions, right? A cyanide-based pesticide known as Zyklon. They converted it into a different type of form known as Zyklon B, and it was used in the gas chambers to kill millions of Fritz's fellow Jews. What? It was his discoveries. It was his inventions, right? He did. And when we look at such a person, right, on one hand, if we look at the world today with 8 billion people alive in the world, perhaps half of them owe their lives to Fritz Haber's, to his work, right? About half of the nitrogen that exists in our bodies right now, it was created by the Haber-Bosch reaction, as it's known, right? We could probably all say that we owe our lives to Fritz Haber, right? Because the world wouldn't support this many people. We wouldn't have food without it. But on the other hand, look at the destruction that he caused, right? He saved and he supported billions of lives. He helped billions of people, but he also killed millions of people, right? And this is really so. That's you're making the argument that billions is a lot better than millions, and that's true. But it's something that the way the world works and the way science works is that the more we try to improve the world, and the more we discover, and the more things we create to improve the world, those same things can also be used to harm people, right? Now, in this week's Parshas Bereishis, we read how Hashem created the world in 6 days. At the end of the 6 days, Hashem rested. And the pasuk says, "Vayichal Elokim bayom hashvi," and then it continues, "Vayishbais bayom hashvi." Hashem completed all of his work, and then he rested, or the word yishbais means that he held back from working. So the Medrash asks, first of all, why is there a double expression, Vayichal and Vayishbais? Vayishbais had actually said before that he rested, right? And it says originally Vayichulu, and then it goes again Vayichal. And furthermore, the word Vayishbais implies that Hashem had to hold back from creating something. If he completed the creation, then he didn't hold anything back. There was nothing, he didn't have to stop working. He completed everything in time. So the Medrash says that actually Hashem was not finished creating the world. The Medrash in Bereishis Rabbah, chapter 7, tells us that right before Shabbos, in the moments before Shabbos, Hashem began creating a new creation, a new creature. And as he was in the middle of the... Now, when he created man originally, he created first the body, and then he created the soul, and he created the spirit. Over here, he decided to do the opposite. He first created the spirit, and then he was going to create the body. But as he finishes creating the spirit, Shabbos comes in. And he wasn't able to create the body. And what came out of this, says the Medrash, that evil spirits and demons were created by this process. Because Hashem stopped in the middle. Right? Yes, they were created at that moment before Shabbos. Is also brought down, I think, the opinion in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. It lists 10 things that were created, and according to one opinion, it was also these evil spirits, these demons. So the obvious question is, what's going on over here? Hashem, first of all, it doesn't take Hashem time to create anything, right? Hashem does everything instantly. And how could Hashem get caught up and lose track of time and, get stuck in the middle of something? What's going on over here, right? What's going on? And obviously, if this is part of the creation of the world, there's a lesson for all of us in all of our lives that we can take from this. So, Rab Pinchas of Koretz was one of the leaders, the giants of his generation. Right? He was a student of the Baal Shem Tov. And people, originally he was kind of kept to himself. Nobody knew about his greatness. But slowly word spread and people began coming to him. And people began asking for blessings, asking for guidance. They wanted to learn from him. And he wasn't so interested in this. He felt, I want to sit and learn and do my own thing. I don't want to get involved in helping people and blessing people and guiding people. Right? That only causes problems. First of all, it's a distraction. And also, who knows what can come out of that, right? I have to get involved with other people and, what problems will come out of that? So he tried to discourage people, push them away. Yeah, you go somewhere else, go to their other rebbes that you can go to, right? The other great tzaddikim. But people kept on coming, and more people kept on coming to him. And he felt that this is not something he wants to be part of, right? He doesn't want to be involved in this type of stuff. He wants to sit on his own and learn, and daven, and serve Hashem. So, he began davening to Hashem, and he said, Hashem, please, I don't want these people to drive me crazy. I don't want everybody to come to me. Make that everyone should hate me. Make that everyone should hate me. No one should be able to stand me. No one should want to get close to me. Now, a tzaddik davens, a tzaddik makes a decree, and Hashem carries it out. So the next day, he walked into shul, everybody moved away, right? Nobody wanted to be near him. And he was originally very happy, very excited about this, right? This is what he prayed for. Finally, he's able to sit on his own, devote his time, to sitting and learning. He doesn't have to get involved in other people and all these distractions and all these other people's problems. The responsibility of guiding other people, he didn't want any of that. And everything's going well until, Elul comes along and he's really excited now to really devote himself to self-improvement, to tshuva, no one to bother him, no one to drive him crazy. Rosh Hashanah comes along, Yom Kippur, and then Sukkot comes. And Sukkot is already a little bit of a problem, right? So, Sukkot, I guess usually he would build a sukkah with his neighbors. Now nobody wants to have any part of him. They don't want him in their sukkah. So he has to go out and try to build his own sukkah. Nobody wants to help him. He has to go around. He never built a sukkah before. Finally, he manages to put together a sukkah. And he gets to shul the first night of Sukkot. Of course, in the back of the shul are all the poor people who are waiting to be invited. And he can't come home on Sukkot without a guest. So he goes to the back of the shul and he goes to one of the poor people. I'd like to invite you to my home. No, I don't want. The guy walks away. I don't want to have any part of it. I don't want to come to your Sukkah. Right? And he goes to the next guy and everybody runs away from him. So he's a little disappointed by this. He's not so happy, but he figures, this is I prayed for this. This is what I wanted, so I'll have to learn to live with it. So he goes home. He sits in the sukkah alone with his family, and as they're about to start the meal, they open up the door and they invite in the ushpizin, the holy guest, the first night of Sukkot. He opens up the door, and Avram Avinu is standing right outside of his sukkah. And he says, welcome, Avram Avinu, come into my sukkah. And Avram's like, I'm not going in. I'm not coming in. And he says, what do you mean you're not coming in? And he says, you don't want anybody in your sukkah. You don't want anybody to like you.
You didn't have your barbecue.
Right?
That's it.
A sukkah without guests, someone who davens that no one should come near him. I'm not going into such a sukkah. And he's like, but I wanted to work on myself. I wanted to refine myself. I wanted to elevate myself. I'm not going into your sukkah. So he begins begging. Avram doesn't want to come in. So finally he davens to Hashem. He says, please Hashem, get rid of this tefillah that I requested. Everyone should like me again. And at that point, Avram Avinu walks in the sukkah, and like 10 of his neighbors come over to join in the meal. They heard there was a barbecue over there, so they came over. Right? And of course it was difficult for him, but he realized this is really what he needs to do. And in our own lives, we all kind of face this challenge. Right? We all have our own things we want to work on. And then there's also our responsibility for our friends, for our neighbors, for our community. And unfortunately, that's a very difficult, it's much more challenging. In our own life and our own avodah, we have control over everything. When we deal with other people, there's a lot of problems when you deal with other people. Right? When you want to reach out to help other people, you end up offending people, you end up getting into fights with people. You try to do good, but mistakes come out, problems come out. Right? So many of us have a natural reaction, let me not focus on other people, I'll focus on myself, a person who's not married doesn't have any shalom bayis problems, right? It works out. All the problems are gone. A person without children doesn't have any problems that come along with children, right? The person doesn't have to change any dirty diapers, right? He doesn't get any calls from the principal about what his children are doing in school, right? He doesn't have any teenage rebellions, right? Life is a lot easier. All the problems are gone, right? A person who doesn't want to get into a fight with anybody has a simple solution. You don't need to interact with other people. You don't have to try to help anybody. You don't have to try to talk to anybody, right? If you want to have the perfect day, what do? Right? This is for single people only. Don't try this if you're married, right? You order some pizza and sushi, right? You sit on the couch, binge watch your favorite shows, and nothing's gonna go wrong that day, right? It'll be a perfect day, right? Everything will go well, no problems. If you try to go out and actually do something, you want to interact with people, you're going to have problems. You're going to run into issues. You're going to have people that are going to get offended by you. People are going to be angry at you. People are going to be upset at you. And it's especially true if you try to actually accomplish something. You try to build something, right? You try to build something up. You try to start an organization. You start a company. You want to help people. You want to help the world. And you know what? You're going to have a lot of enemies. A lot of people who are not going to get along with you. Right? And the more you do, the more successful you are in helping other people. Unfortunately, the way the world is created, also the more people you're going to end up harming. Right? And this is a choice we have to make. Which direction do we want to go in life? Right? The Rebbe Rashab once advised one of his Hasidim to become a shoichet. And the person said, a shoichet, it's a tremendous responsibility. Shechting animals, you have to be so careful with everything you do. A little move, I move my hand the wrong way, I could create a terrible problem. I'm afraid. I don't want to become a shoichet, I'm afraid. So the Rebbe Rashab said, so who should we get as a shoichet? People who are not afraid. People who are afraid, those are the people that we need to get involved in this type of work. Right? Someone who is worried, who wants to be so careful, wants to be so careful in what he does. Right? And this is the way Hashem created the world. He created the world in a way that if we want to build something, when we start building something, the bigger we build, the greater the chances are that it's going to collapse and that someone's going to get hurt. Right? And we have to struggle with this. And Hashem says, I am also struggling with this. Hashem is perfect. You would think when Hashem created the world, everything went according to plan. But if you take a look at the 6 days of creation, not one day went by without a problem. Right? The first day, Hashem gets up, he's all excited, he has a whole plan. He's going to create the world. He has a whole plan, he's going to create the world according to strict justice. He's going to have strict justice in the world. And he starts creating the world, Midas Adin. Things start falling apart. The whole world's falling apart, and he says, you have to redo it now with rachamim, with mercy. I have to change my plans. Right? Fine, okay, tomorrow hopefully it'll be better. Right? The next day Hashem gets up, he's going to split the upper and lower waters, everything's working so well, and suddenly the lower waters start complaining, they're all offended. Hashem, what? You pushed us away? And Hashem's like, no, don't worry, we can work it out. I'm telling you, we're going to have salt, we're going to take salt, we're going to put it on carbonates. Yes, this, the whole fight breaks out. And the lower waters are offended, and Hashem has to start appeasing it. Right? Tuesday comes along, Hashem turns to the ground, he has this plan, we're going to make these edible trees we're going to create. Everything's going to be so delicious. Right? What does the earth do? It doesn't listen to Hashem, right? It creates trees that are not edible, but just edible fruits, and Hashem has to get at the fight, punish the earth later because of it. Right? Wednesday, Hashem has this plan. He has these two great luminaries in the sky, and then they start fighting. Right? And Hashem has to make one of them smaller, and then the moon gets offended, and Hashem has to apologize, and he has to tell us to bring a sacrifice for him. Right? Oh, another problem. Right? The fifth day comes along. Right? And Hashem creates the fish, and he decides he's going to create the greatest fish, the pair of Leviathan fish, right? And then Hashem creates these two Leviathan fish, and he's like, oy vey, these two fish are going to start reproducing, and they're going to destroy the whole world, right? I have to take one of them and shecht it and pickle it for 6,000 years, right? I have to change the plans. And finally, Friday comes along. This is going to be the best day. He's going to create man. And then what happens? Moments before Shabbos, he creates a bunch of demons. Come along. Right? What is Hashem telling us? Hashem's telling us that's the way the world works. The greater you want to create, the more impact you want to have, the more problems are going to come out. And you have to realize this is part of creation. Right? This is how things work. Right? You're going to have to deal with it. This is the way I made the world. I went through the same thing that you're going through. Right? And each and every one of us in our lives, we look around and we say, we're doing so much, but so many things are going wrong. Right? We're creating so many demons. So many problems. So many people are angry at us. We offended so many people. We're trying to make up for it. We're trying to help. But look what we're doing. Look at the destruction that we're causing. Right? This has happened to me as well. And if you truly did it for the right purposes, Hashem says, I want you to know that it's actually part of the plan. And the Gemara in Me'ilah tells us a fascinating story. Right? It tells us that the Romans once made a decree. The Roman Senate once decided they're going to make a decree against the Jewish people. They're going to make 3 decrees. They're going to decree that the Jewish people cannot observe Shabbos. They're going to decree. They're going to outlaw bris milah. And they're going to outlaw mikvah's family purity. So the Jewish people have a big problem, right? They can't live a Jewish life with these 3 decrees. So who's going to help them out? So the Gemara tells us there was this Rabbi Reuven ben Isteroibli who came along and he says, I'm going to solve the problem. I'm going to solve the problem. What did he do? He went out to the Roman marketplace and he bought himself some beautiful, nice, fancy Roman toga, right? And it's, I don't know, whatever clothing the Romans wear. I'm not very familiar with the Roman clothing, right? And he heads into the barber shop over there, and he's like, give me a Roman cut. I don't know what the Roman haircut looked like. Anybody knows? Right?
I think so. I bald, right?
He gets a good, nice Roman haircut. He decorates himself with whatever Romans would wear or whatever. And he heads to the Roman Senate. Right? He comes into the Roman Senate, and he walks in, he greets everybody hello, as if he's their good friend, and they're all looking at him. They don't recognize this guy, but he looks like an important, prominent Roman senator, and they don't want to admit that they don't know who he is, so they all sit around, and they begin discussing their plans for the new decrees that they're about to put out. And suddenly this Reuven gets up, and he's like, I don't understand you guys. If you have an enemy, do you want your enemy to be wealthy or poor? Of course we want our enemy to be poor. So why do you want them to work on Shabbos? They can make more money that way. Right? They're going to make more money that way. Right? You should tell them they have to keep Shabbos. Right? That way, if they close all the Jewish stores, they're going to earn less money, they're going to be poor. Great idea. This is a great, we didn't think about that, right? So they decide to get rid of the Shabbos decree. Right? Then he gets up and he's like, if you have an enemy, do you want your enemy to be strong or weak? Of course you want our enemies to be weak. So shouldn't you want them to do this operation on a little child, a bris milah? They'll end up being weaker. You don't want them to be healthy? No, you're right. You're we should tell them they have to do a bris milah, right? All Jews need a bris milah now. This is great, right? So then he gets up and he's like, if you have enemies, do you want a lot of enemies or do you want very few enemies? I want very few enemies. So shouldn't you? What do you have against the family purity that causes all these limitations? It's harder for them to reproduce, right? You should. Why would you want to make such a decree? So they're like, you're right. Great, it's a great idea. Let's get rid of these terrible decrees. I don't know what we were thinking, right? And Reuven's so excited. He leaves at the end of the day. He goes home. He tells everybody that what he did. Everyone's very excited. And the next day, the Roman Senate gets together again. And they're like looking around. Where's that guy who was here yesterday? Anybody knows who that guy was? One guy whispers to his friend, that guy yesterday, I was embarrassed to say something, but I don't know who he is. It's like, I don't know either. Maybe somebody knows, and you start asking around, and nobody knows who he is. So like, it must have been a Jewish spy, right? A Jewish spy came to trick us, right? Now, he tricked us into getting rid of those 3 decrees. Now, maybe we should put the decrees back, but he has good points. But he's a Jewish spy. We can't let the Jews get away with this, right? We're going to reinstate the 3 decrees. So they reinstate the 3 decrees, and they send it to the emperor for emperor's signature, right? And now the Jews are in big trouble. What are they going to do, right? So they decide to send a delegation to the emperor. So who are they going to send? So they decide to send Reb Shimon bar Yochai and Rabbi Elazar bar Rabbi Yossi. Reuven tried, and it didn't work out, right? I guess it pushed it off for some period of time, whatever. But so Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and Rabbi Elazar bar Rabbi Yossi head to Rome, and as they're arriving, as they're approaching the gates of the city, the Gemara says they were greeted. They were greeted by a demon named Ben Tamalyon. He emerged from the city to greet them. And Shimon bar Yochai is very upset. He's like, my grandfather's maidservant, Avraham Avinu's maidservant Hagar, when she was in trouble, Hashem sent 3 angels to help her. Me, they had to send a demon, right? They couldn't send even 1 angel to help me. But listen, if this is the help that's being offered, I'll take advantage of it. And he says to this demon, this Ben Tamalyon, what are you here for? And he's like, I'm here to help you. How are you going to help me? And he describes the plan. He tells Shimon bar Yochai the plan. And a few moments later, the demon disappears into the city, and it enters the body of the king's daughter, of the emperor's daughter. And she goes crazy, and she starts screaming, and they start bringing doctors to try to cure her, and nothing helps. Right? And the king announces, if anybody can cure my daughter, a tremendous reward. So Shimon bar Yochai and Elazar bar Yossi come into the city. We're here to help the king's daughter. We heard the king's daughter is sick. Right? So they come in, and the king is desperate for help. He's even willing to let these rabbis into his palace, right? And they come in, and as soon as they come in, Rav Shimon bar Yochai says, Ben Tamalyon, leave, and immediately he left, and the king's daughter was cured. The emperor was so thankful. He said, what can I give you? Anything. You can go into my royal treasury, take whatever you want. And he's like, okay. He goes into the royal chamber, and he looks for this document that the king was about to sign or had just signed. And he says, I want this document, this decree. And he proceeds to tear it up, and the decrees were annulled. So, on one hand, right, Hashem, on the last day of creation, right before Shabbos, he messed up, right? He created demons. But the Gemara tells us these demons are also there to help us, right? They cause a lot of destruction, right? Millions, I don't know how much destruction they caused, how many people were harmed by them. But they're also part of creation. They can also be beneficial, right? And we have to realize that in our own lives, even when we create something that looks like a demon, right? It can harm millions of people. We have to realize that it also has the potential. If we did it with the right purpose, if we made the effort to help people and to accomplish something good, then perhaps millions of people were harmed, but we can save billions of people. and we can accomplish great things. So we should all, in our own personal lives, first of all, we have to realize that sometimes we have a choice whether we should reach out to help others, and we're afraid. The natural reaction is to say, I don't want to create demons, I don't want to offend anybody, I don't want to fight with somebody, right? I'll leave it, I'll let it go. I won't do anything, I won't do it. So the Torah tells us no. Hashem says, every day I made a mistake, but I continued making it. I continued making more and more every day. Right? And then the second lesson is that when we look back and we say, look how I messed up, look at this demon that I created. So Hashem says, I also did that. I also messed up. And you know what? This very demon saved Klal Yisrael and annulled those 3 decrees. Chaim l'chaim. We should all continue doing more and more. And even if some demons are created along the way, those should be demons that save Klal Yisrael. Chaim l'chaim.